Hi, my name's Mary Elkins, and I'm going to talk to you about the amygdala hijack and how that relates to anxiety. The amygdala, or amygdalae, as one is located in each hemisphere, is located at the end of the hippocampus. Our brains are divided into two hemispheres, the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. These hemispheres join together in the middle and mirror each other. And so in the brain, the hippocampus, which is strongly associated with memory, is the blue, in this image, the blue horseshoe-shaped structure, and at the end, the yellow structures are the amygdala. In the right hemisphere, the amygdala is often associated with negative emotions, whereas in the left hemisphere, the amygdala can be associated with both pleasant and unpleasant emotions. The left hemisphere amygdala may also play a strong role in the brain's reward system. The amygdala plays a role in many different types of behavior, notably aggression, eating, and sexual functions. In extreme circumstances where individuals may have uncontrollable or frequent outbursts of aggression, they may receive an amygdalotomy. This is a surgery where part of the amygdala is removed or destroyed. And interestingly, when individuals have gotten the amygdalotomy, there has been an associated impairment in the ability to remember faces and interpret facial expressions. The amygdala is responsible for the memory of emotions. Because it's connected to the hippocampus, which plays a strong role in memory, you can see that as we code these memory responses, or these memory cues, the emotional responses associated with them are often coded very closely due to the amygdala. So the amygdala helps us to remember what to be afraid of, what to be angry about, what we are sad about, what we love, what makes us happy, and who we might feel attachment to. It helps us to associate those emotional responses with our visual cues as well as auditory cues, sensory, like smelling, and other things like what we touch, anything that's related to the sensations, because there's also a structure called the hypothalamus where a lot of that comes in, and those sensations are then basically read by both the hippocampus and the amygdala, and they're interpreted and compared to these things that are in memory to determine if there is a response, an emotional response, or a response related to memory. This is how our brain creates shortcuts and is able to take us different places. So this is where you might find triggers for different things. And so that's what we're going to talk about, is a fear conditioning, which is the trigger. It's the process by which we learn to associate a negative stimulus with another factor. So for example, we learn to associate this feeling of fear or a dog coming at us, a scary dog coming at us, with another factor, meaning just the dog itself. So having this experience where we have had a dog coming at us and it was very frightening because the dog was barking and whatnot. The fear conditioning will now associate all dogs with this potential negative experience that we had after that scary dog. That's done with the amygdala and the hippocampus, so that process of consolidating memory. This is also why we have the fight or flight response. In our bodies, the fight or flight or freeze response is part of the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system, which is part of the autonomic nervous system. So when we have a response, our amygdala, our hypothalamus, takes in sensory information, something that we see, something that maybe we hear or smell, something we might taste, something that we touch, it takes in that sensory information and sends it to the amygdala. The amygdala utilizes the information that's accessible through the hippocampus, through memory, to determine, is this something we've seen before, and if it is, how should we react? If it's something that might be scary or might have been seen as scary in the past, then it will initiate the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system. By initiating the sympathetic nervous system, there's a lot of things that happen in our bodies. Our pupils dilate. Our salivation pretty much stops. So, we get really dry mouth. The bronchi in our lungs relax, which makes us feel like we need to take in a lot more air. Our heart rate accelerates. That's to pump this now super oxygenated blood into our bodies. Our digestive activity is slowed or inhibited, sometimes extremely, to where we're not even digesting. Our liver releases glucose in order to power our muscles and to power our ability to think quickly and to move out of this situation. The kidneys secrete epinephrine and norepinephrine, which are part of the adrenaline response. And our bladder relaxes, which is why in some cases somebody might have a urinary reaction, and our rectum contracts. This is all done to remove anything in our body that might slow us down and to get us to be able to fight or run away from the danger. After the sympathetic response has concluded and theoretically the danger is gone, the parasympathetic nervous system kicks in, and it does the reverse of what the sympathetic nervous system has done. It relaxes the rectum, contracts the bladder, it stimulates the gallbladder, which allows the processing of glucose from different foods that we eat. It stimulates the digestive activity, constricts the bronchi, so we no longer feel like we're running out of air. It inhibits the heart, so it slows down that heartbeat. It stimulates salivation, allows us to begin the salivation process, and constricts the pupil. So it's not actually making the pupil much smaller, it's just no longer dilating the pupil. The largest and strongest nerve in the parasympathetic nervous system is the vagal nerve. And when we talk about the fight, flight, or freeze response, the freeze response actually comes from the vagal nerve. It is an extreme self-preservation action when both running away or fighting the danger won't work. So our body's ability to adapt is to put us into extreme parasympathetic response, meaning it utilizes the vagal nerve to essentially make our body freeze, and we're not unable to move. These are all responses that are very normal and adaptive. Imagine if we're in caveman times, and during those caveman times, we see a cute little saber-tooth tiger kitten, and we go up to it and we're like, oh, what a cute little kitten, and then, the hypothalamus is able to tell from maybe something we hear rustling in the grass. The hypothalamus knows, oh, that might mean mama saber-tooth tiger is around. And so it will initiate the fight or flight response. Now, can we run away from a saber-tooth tiger? It's hard to tell. Maybe we can. Depending on how far away we are, perhaps we can run away. And maybe that's the best option. Our body might do that. But in some cases, perhaps it might be the best option to freeze and not move at all, as if you no longer exist, because then you're not a threat and you're not running away and stimulating the chase response in the other animal. So maybe freeze is what you do. You're frozen in fear. These are all adaptive responses that kept us alive. In these adaptive responses, one of the things that happens is that we respond utilizing amygdala learning. Peter Diamandis says, once we start believing that the apocalypse is coming, the amygdala goes on high alert. filtering out most anything that says otherwise. Isn't that kind of what has happened a little bit during this pandemic? We believe that the pandemic is the apocalypse in some ways. Things are coming, and our amygdala is now afraid of going outside and being social. It's afraid of spending time with others. It's afraid of physically being in contact with anyone else. And so our amygdala has now gone onto high alert, because not only are we afraid of people, we're afraid of getting sick, and we're afraid of loneliness, and we're afraid of all these things. So high alert, okay? And our amygdala is filtering out anything that says that there's no need to be afraid. That's what's going on in our nation with this polarization, where people believe very strongly about this position, and then there are equally strong positions on the other side. That's that polarization. And that's happening because we're unable to filter. We're unable to see compromise. We're unable to see the good of the other side. Our amygdala has been able to determine this is what is real, this is what is right, and with that determination, it's filtering out all other data. One of the things that happens with chronic stress is cortisol. So our body releases cortisol as part of the stress response. Cortisol does a lot of things to the body, but in addition to just a normal sympathetic nervous system response, cortisol also has a compounding effect. Cortisol actually does a lot of damage to our hippocampus. The device in our brain that's connected to the amygdala, it kind of eats holes into the hippocampus. It atrophies it. It makes it so it has a hard time remembering things or remembering things accurately. And so it makes sense that cortisol would contribute to perhaps depression or chronic fatigue, maybe some migraines, maybe some concentration problems. But there are other effects, including decreased metabolism, hypertension, sleep deprivation, tunnel vision, acid reflux, hostility, hunger, arthritis, and a decreased immune system. Some of these are just, if you remember what the sympathetic nervous system is doing to our bodies, it makes sense. If we are constantly under stress and we are constantly engaging the sympathetic nervous system, it makes sense that when the activation of our stomach is being shut off, it's inhibiting these digestive functions, it makes sense that we're going to have some hunger as that response comes in and bounces back and forth. We're not hungry when we need it because we're in that sympathetic that sympathetic response, but then we are hungry when we go into the parasympathetic response. And then if we go back into stress, we're not eating, and then we're hungry when we come back out of it. So we have this constant in and out. One of the greatest things about our bodies is we have a natural ability to heal ourselves. Oxytocin is the love and bonding chemical. This chemical is released in our body, and this hormone is released in our body when we're around people that we love, when we're spending time with other people and being social. It's present during childbirth. It's present during lactation. It's present during sex. It's present during laughing activities, things that we're doing together socially. Okay, so this oxytocin, it is such a powerful chemical. It can actually repair the damage to the hippocampus that cortisol causes. It has the ability to reverse all the damage that has been done with cortisol. I think it is an amazing adaptation by our body that we can have too much stress. We can have, too much, of a good thing through dopamine. We can have too much serotonin, and it could cause some pretty bad stuff. Serotonin syndrome, you can look that up. But we can have all of these things that it could be too much, except oxytocin. There's no such thing as having too much oxytocin. There is no such thing as having too much love. I think that's freaking amazing. And our bodies are built to say, oh, that's too much of a good thing. Too much vitamins, too much protein, too much carbohydrates. Not enough, and we have a problem. But too much of everything else, that's a problem. But too much oxytocin does not exist. And that's really cool. All right, so how can stress lead to anxiety? When your body experiences the fight or flight response, it releases chemicals into your body, just like we just talked about. And it helps your brain to improve your physical functions to get you away or to fight. You gotta run away or fight, right? You need that glucose to power your muscles. You need to have the glucose in your brain to like power your ability to think quickly on your feet. But if this chemical response is triggered often, studies have shown that it can cause the brain to malfunction to make the fear response more sensitive. And that makes sense. The amygdala learns when it's being activated. To manage the amygdala, we have to deal with what's going on. So the activation of the amygdala is the fuel for all anxiety disorders. What a person does to respond to and manage the symptoms of anxiety differs, but amygdala activation underlies and motivates the disordered behavior. There are a couple of ways, three main ways that we're going to talk about real quickly, how people try to manage and reduce anxiety. One is by worrying. We worry about what could be happening. We think of consequences. We think of what might be going on. Another might be compulsions, thinking of obsessive compulsive disorder. This is where we might feel like, okay, if I tap the door handle 4 times, or if I lock the door 3 times, and then I walk 7 steps, it's very structured and detailed of how to handle certain situations. Those are the compulsions. Or avoidance. Avoidance is just staying away from the thing that activates us. So calming down the irritable amygdala. There are ways to calm down an irritable amygdala, which is what it's called when an amygdala is super sensitive. It's called the irritable amygdala. Some immediate effects, like you need them right now, are diaphragmatic breathing. You can try this right now by interlacing your fingers together and placing those fingers behind your head as if you're going to lean back with your head cradled in your head. Okay, your head cradled in your hands. Then draw your elbows backwards towards each other. Now you don't want them to touch. All you're doing is stretching out your chest. And as you do this, take a deep breath. And if you take that deep breath and hold it for a few seconds, and you let it out, you'll notice an immediate amygdala calming sensation. And the reason why that is the diaphragm. When we use diaphragmatic breathing, the diaphragm expands and presses against the vagal nerve, and it stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system. Not in the dorsal side, which is the freeze response, but in the relaxation side. Another effect to calm down an irritable amygdala is aerobic exercise, getting your heart rate up. That allows your body to start releasing endorphins. Yoga is a great way to get immediate effects to calm down an irritable amygdala. This is because it combines diaphragmatic breathing and aerobic exercise all into one activity. You can get short-term effects through regular aerobic exercise, yoga, and increased sleep. To get lasting change, we need to work with exposure. That means getting exposed to the thing that makes you anxious and not responding in an anxious way. So for relaxation, we can use breathing exercises, meditation, yoga, stimulating the vagus nerve through diaphragmatic breathing, that's the belly breathing. Aerobic exercise is 20 minutes of exercise, and your amygdala is less active in that time, and it kind of hits that reset button on your amygdala. And like I said, one of the ways that we typically see as a response for anxiety is avoidance. This is one of the most common responses to anxiety. And we see this in a lot of different ways. A lot of different things are all related to anxiety. Trust is related to anxiety. When you have a lack of trust, you have high relationship anxiety. And so when you don't want to face the distrustful things, or you're not able to face the fear of offering trust to your partner, you avoid that through activities that you think are going to help trust, like constantly checking on your partner's phone or your partner's location, things like that. But those are really avoidance techniques. And so anxiety it manifests in many different ways. But in just typical anxiety, let's say you have some anxiety about talking to other people, so you avoid talking to them. So typically, although this is the most common response to anxiety, it's effective and it's natural, but it only serves to increase the fear response. And the reason why that is because every single time we avoid, or every single time we check our partner's phone, or every single time we do not engage in that social situation, we reinforce the same message to our amygdala that this situation is dangerous. When we look at a life of avoidance, when a person is confronted with an anxiety-producing situation, it leads to an uncomfortable sensation of worry and agitation. If we engage in avoidance, if we go, okay, I'm not going to deal with it, I'm going to go, I'm just not going to, or I have to check, I have to see what my partner's doing, then what happens is we have relief. We feel relief. However, the next time the same situation comes up, we're going to have an even higher agitation, because now our amygdala has learned that this is how you handle that situation. And so it's going to continue to cause us to have this high anxiety response every time, because it's trying to create shortcuts for us to be able to quickly address and assess information. Go back to the saber-tooth tiger. If we had learned, if our ancestors, which I'm sure they did, had learned that a cute little fluffy saber-tooth tiger kitten is probably not far from its parent, then every time we saw that cute little fluffy saber-tooth tiger kitten, we're not going to be like, oh, that's so adorable. We're going to go away from that. We're going to get away. We're going to back away quickly. We're going to look, be very alert to our surroundings and make sure we're not backing into mama. But we're going to get away from that baby. We're not going to go and try to pet the little baby saber-tooth tiger. So it was a very adaptive response, and so it's normal and natural. But we don't live back there anymore. We do not live in the time where there are saber-tooth tigers and there are these constant threats that we need to avoid. There are some threats that we need to avoid. If you are in a very dangerous situation and you recognize that these certain conditions equal danger, then yes, avoid those situations, such as, walking down a dark alley in the middle of the night all alone. It makes sense that you would have an anxiety response and you'd want to avoid that. And every time you avoid it, you're probably keeping yourself safer. Those are perfectly fine to avoid. But when we avoid things that we want to participate in, for example, healthy relationships or social relationships, or being able to go outside, being able to spend time with family, being able to engage with people at work. Those are the things that make our life no longer as fulfilling as it could be. So those types of avoidance, we need to do something about. That's where exposure comes in. Exposure is hard. It's a very stressful experience, but the only way to train an amygdala is to activate the amygdala. Every time you activate an amygdala and you show the amygdala that the situation is not actually dangerous, the amygdala goes, maybe this isn't dangerous. But you have to sit in it for a long time, because otherwise the amygdala is not going to know that the situation is not dangerous. So looking at this graph, you can see that the first exposure, you might get up to a SUDS level of 9 or 90, depending on how you look at SUDS. And it might just last for a long time, but over, 50 to 100 minutes, it goes down pretty low. You keep doing that and you notice that each time it's going to maybe go down a little bit faster until we get to the 5th exposure. It doesn't even go up as high anymore. And it goes down all the way to 0. This is what we want from prolonged exposure. You sit in this anxiety-provoking situation until the anxiety goes down. Our bodies can't keep it up that long. We saw how the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system work. They work in tandem, and we don't have enough adrenaline and enough norepinephrine and enough of these different things going through our body to hold it for that long. It eventually has to go down. And as long as it goes down and you don't actually experience life or death, then you have successfully exposed yourself to this anxiety-provoking situation and won. You beat that moment. Exposure can be done in a variety of ways. In vivo exposure, this is, the real life exposure. Imaginal exposure is where you imagine going into the anxiety-provoking situation. Our brains cannot tell the difference between reality and fantasy. So we know what's not real and what's not, but our limbic system does not know what's not real and what's not. That's why when we have something kind of scary happen to us and when that memory gets trapped in our brains, that's why they feel like they're happening right now. Because our brain, that part of our brain, the limbic system, does not know if we're imagining what's happening or if we're really experiencing it. So imaginal exposures are really great ways to deal with getting these exposures happening. A virtual reality exposure, this is where you actually use a device. Your therapist or your physician has to work with you on that. And interoceptive exposures are being exposed to the body sensations that may be involved in your anxiety response. For example, if you have an anxiety response because your heart's beating so fast, interoceptive exposure would mean that you are being exposed to that high heart rate. So you would do something, maybe cardio, to induce a high heart rate. Exposures can be done in a graded exposure, meaning you start with maybe a lower activation activity. So maybe something on like about 50 or 60 on the subjective units of distress scale. And then you work your way, that one slowly goes down and you work your way up to the higher ones. Flooding is being repeatedly exposed to the same high anxiety producing situation over and 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 over again. Systematic desensitization is taking a piece of the the anxiety response or piece of the thing that you're anxious about, and slowly over time just being exposed to enough of it that you are able to sit in that feeling. Exposures are really great for habituation, getting used to it. Extinction, no longer being anxious. Learning self-efficacy, being able to do this on your own now. Emotional processing, being able to finally let these things go. The key to all exposure activities is to stay in the anxiety and to stay into it until the anxiety is reduced. This is the only way to retrain the amygdala to recode that stimulus that it is not dangerous. There are lots of ways to do that, and I encourage you to contact your counselor to find out. So thank you very much, and I hope that you enjoyed this presentation.